you got a slap on the wrist for murdering your mother or orchestrating it, because you are a murderer and planned it all, why would you want to sell a book not only promoting Dee Dee's passing, wasn't passing, cold-blooded, needing the public to see you as a victim, needing to see your side of things, unless you're an absolute psychopath?
So I bought Gypsy Rose's new audiobook that came out yesterday where she justifies why she did what she did. And she says it's not a true crime, it's a memoir, but I actually think it might be a comedy. Because, like, okay, some of it is, like, sick, depraved, terrible, probably shouldn't have been published in the first place. But the sickest burn I've seen in a fat minute. As part of her justification when she talks about, like, how mean her mom was to her, she's like,
My mom had bipolar and schizophrenia, and she used to tell me, I have 8 personalities, and 7 of them don't like you.
That is the funniest shit.
Gypsy Rose's memoir is ultimately about passing on the blame to her mother Dee Dee and Nick Godejohn, who were both victims of the decision she made of unaliving her mother. The memoir that Gypsy labels as the story of her life rather than a true crime story basically highlights how she was an innocent victim that was abused by her mother and hence led her to unalive her. In the memoir, Gypsy paints herself as a survivor of her mother's abuse who was unfortunately no longer here to defend herself. And then mentions that she was a victim of Nick's too, which contradicts all the fact that Nick was actually a victim of Gypsy because of using him to execute her atrocious crime despite his autistic condition.
What a painful read that was, I have to say. I'm not even gonna lie. It was nothing crazy in this book. It was everything I think I pretty much expected. The exaggerations of stories previously told, the addition of some new little, in my opinion, lies that she kind of threw in there to twist and turn and, put the blame on other people, everybody but herself. She never actually took accountability in this book. She kind of goes around it and tries to act like she is, but she never actually takes accountability.
Gypsy has made this whole book tarnishing her mother and Nick's name because they are both not free to share their side of the story, with the former unalived and the latter locked away for life without possibility of parole. Let us look at some of those parts that Gypsy chose to flip on her mother and Nick. We can agree that in most cases, every crime offender has a childhood sad story they would have to tell to back up why they committed the offense. But to some extent, one would have to take accountability regardless of their story. Gypsy didn't do this with her book. It was all about how she was caught up in an abusive environment and how she had become a victim to another person so that she could be saved from her abusive mother. But does any of that validate what she decided to plan on doing for about 2 years? I don't think so. Gypsy writes that her mother made physical and verbally abused her, narrating one of her physical abuse being one time she was found talking about a man named Dan on the phone. She writes that her mother called her a whore and punched her legs, describing the action that she was as though Dee Dee was a boxer and Gypsy was a piece of meat hanging on a freezer locker.
What did you hear in that excerpt? Because if I'm being honest, what I'm hearing is this is all bullshit, fabricated from what other people's memories have about what happened in my life, and I am piecing things together to try to justify my actions for unaliving my own mother. That's what I'm hearing. We are going to start reading this book tomorrow afternoon. I do have to work all day tomorrow, so it will be tomorrow afternoon whenever we start reading this. I wanted to share the author's note because I wanted to get your opinion on what you think this author's note is saying, because it speaks to her own emotions, her own perceptions. It doesn't say that it's fact.
This was the physical abuse, but remember, in the beginning, Gypsy had claimed that she had only been medically abused and never was it physical. At least even the medical examination suggested that there was no physical abuse apart from her knuckles were kind of bruised, like she had punched something. This is all Gypsy now turning it on her mother that she was now physically abusive. Apart from the official claim of being medically abused, was this one of the memoirs that she had forgotten? Was this one of the memories that she had forgotten, like she has told us in interviews, that memories kept coming back to her? Gypsy writes in her book that she had another encounter with Dan, and that's when she was again physically abused and was handcuffed to a dog leash and it was connected to her body. She wrote, "If If she fell asleep, I couldn't move without waking her up. Gypsy also wrote that. The leashing went on for 2 weeks, quoting that I was at her mercy for everything, to go to the bathroom, for food, for everything. As punishment, she would not feed me every day, just a little bit of broth every other day. I would frequently get hunger pains. She was right beside me and would eat whatever she wanted. She kept a knife by her bedside table, which she said was for protection if I attempted to run away or do anything to leave.
Oh, in Gypsy's book, she said she was not allowed to play with Barbie dolls. She didn't want me to see the anatomy, no matter how poorly scaled of a woman. Now, I call that a lie. Oh, look, Gypsy. There you are with a Barbie doll. Girl, I think you should start writing down these lies that you're telling.
This was part of her allegations upon her mother that she was malnourished by her mother, but all this wasn't found out after her arrest so again, making her mother the monster that didn't care for her child to give her food. Yet all Didi did was ensure to give Gypsy all privileges in life, so how would she starve her? And showing that her mother was capable of stabbing her child, or we could say her ticket getting to the public sympathy and financial support. Don't think Didi would take the risk.
She did not have a door on her bedroom. So apparently, per Gypsy, Nick would stand in front of the doorway and block the view if she had to walk past for any reason. I never believed that. So that means you either saw her, your mother, expired, because you were there, or you looked after, or you looked before you left, or you saw the crime scene photos. Either way, you're contradicting yourself. You saw it, so you said. My hot take on it is that I believe Gypsy starts with an S, ends with a path. I believe she would relish in this crime. Of course she would go look. She would want to take that mental picture and relive it time and time again.
However much Didi was controlling or something of some effort, she loved good things for her daughter Gypsy. Gypsy also paints her mother as a #1 liar and manipulator, and she talks about how her mother's first lie was to tell her that she was a virgin before she met her father, and had lied to her father too about her actual age when they had just met. This is Gypsy degrading her mother in her absentia. Like, how did she know about her mother's stand in accordance to seeing men? Why did she think she lied? Was that even necessary to talk about in the book? Or she was just trying to show us this kind of image of Didi?
So I bought Gypsy Rose's new audiobook that came out yesterday where she justifies why she did what she did. And she says it's not a true crime, it's a memoir, but I actually think it might be a comedy. Because, like, okay, some of it is, like, sick, depraved, terrible, probably shouldn't have been published in the first place. But the sickest burn I've seen in a fat minute. As part of her justification when she talks about, like, how mean her mom was to her, she's like,
My mom had bipolar and schizophrenia, and she used to tell me, I have 8 personalities and 7 of them don't like you.
that is the funniest shit.
Gypsy also openly writes about her mother's having Munchausen by proxy, but this was never diagnosed of Didi while she was alive, and no medical reports could prove this, but she decided to write about her mother having this disorder even without proof. Gypsy decided to create her own narrative about her mother because she no longer has a voice to defend herself. And so Gypsy can write about her mother in whichever way she wants.
This is the name of the chromosome disorder, 1q21.1, microdeletion. This is the poster child for this chromosome disorder, and it's from rarechromo.com. I bet you thought that was Gypsy. Nope, it's just the poster child for this chromosome disorder. This is Gypsy Rose Blanchard in prison, and this is the poster child for this chromosome disorder. I just want you guys to see the similarities. All in all, they're crazy, but developmentally delayed, intellectual disabilities, poor growth, seizure, behavioral issues, hearing impairment, joint laxity, hypotonia, which is weak muscle tone. That's the wheelchair. So her mom embellished her issues for financial gain, which is malingering and not Munchausen by proxy. She did have seizures because this was part of this chromosomal disorder. The feeding tube was for the failure to thrive and the developmental delay. So basically, she needed that to thrive, which is why she was on the feeding tube. She did really have seizures. She was stealing her mom's medication. She obviously admitted to that. But this just shows that she had these issues. Now, the Munchausen by proxy was the excuse when she was arrested. Her attorney came up with that line, and she actually admits to that. Let's actually listen to that.
My 2 attorneys are telling me that my mother has something called Munchausen by proxy.
In the book, there was a part where she puts all the blame on Nick, saying how he was overly controlling, how he was the one that came up with all the brutal fantasies, and the part read, Nick introduced the violence, the murders, the blood, the craving, brutal rape fantasies, and I was so afraid of losing his validations. I ignored his ex-girlfriend's Facebook message warning that he was controlling and not all there. Again, throwing Nick way under the bus so that the reader could see Gypsy like the little sweet, kind girl that had no role to play in the whole act, and pretending like all this was Nick's idea, yet they both had equal roles in playing the act, making it seem like she was Nick's victim and that he was controlling and making her his submissive, which was all not true because Gypsy always called the shots and would threaten to leave Nick if he did comply to her suggestions.
Basically here, she's saying negotiations, and it's chapter 13, and she's talking about Nicholas Godejohn. You could pause to read. I'm just going to kind of give you a brief synopsis of this. Basically, she's saying that Nick had her go to his home, and basically she felt like she didn't have any choices, and she was kind of forced. So she's trying to say that she was a victim of his. Also, she says, not necessarily in this part, I can't remember which part, but she did say that he essayed her. Y'all, reading this book really shows you who she is as a person. And what makes it even worse is that, you know, Melissa Moore is behind this. She also speaks about Victor as if Victor is a character that Nicholas made up, and that's bothering to me. She did speak about the Facebook exchanges, but none of this is truthful. And I think what bothers me the most about this book is that I feel as though they've allowed her to make a fictional book and pass it off as real. This is a big problem. Let's go to the next page. Actually, before we do, she speaks about she submitted to him and blah, 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 blah. But you know that that is not the case. We know that Nicholas Godejohn really followed her orders, which is why she made all of those Ruby videos and like how she handled things. And the fact that she put this in a book is asinine. Then she's here in caps. Basically, she's trying to act as if she was emotionally abused and forced. She had no control over anything. And she plays that a lot in her life. If you notice, everyone she is a victim of. And even creators on this app, she's a victim of creators. Like she tries to play like we are the ones that have stopped her from pursuing her life and stopped her from being what she wants to be. She will not take accountability at all. And in the grand scheme of things, that is very concerning.
She also makes Nick a villain when she wrote in a dialogue format that when Nick agreed to her suggestion of unaliving her mother as Victor, like their role-playing game where Victor was the one ruthless one. She wrote that he suggested to abuse her mother after he was done unaliving her. Gypsy took the opportunity to portray herself as the good-hearted that objected Nick's suggestion, and then Nick furiously, which she suggested with capital letters, asked how he would help her to unalive her mother, yet she refused to give him the one thing he asked. Gypsy says she offered herself in place of her mother, and that's where she highlights that Nick abused her after her mother's was unalived.
Accountability is the act of accepting responsibility for one's actions. Someone please give gypsy-rose Blanchard a dictionary so that she can look that word up, because accountability is something that is lacked a lot in this memoir, and I was hoping that we would get some of, but silly me to hope. This book is like being inside the head of someone with borderline personality disorder that is blaming their entire lives on every action that was done to them as opposed to every action that they took. There is one part in the very end where she takes a little bit of ounce accountability sprinkled in, but other than that, it's a story of blaming the victim for why they were murdered. I didn't expect much more from her, but it's interesting nonetheless, and it's shocking and jaw-dropping a few times with a little bit TMI. Like, Gypsy, we didn't need to know about that thing you did in prison, but thanks for telling us, because now we know. And it's a quick read. It's a really quick read, because her lack of education, you can tell she clearly wrote this book, because it's very easily sloppily written. But if you want the inside of someone who can kill, there you go.
But really, apart from wanting to accuse Nick and defame him, is it abuse if it was out of consent? To that, I remember when Nick was interrogated at the county when they had just been arrested days after Didi's unaliving. Nick has been asked if he had abused Didi after unaliving, and he said he hadn't touched her. He even said that he found the thought disgusting. We know Nick had been truthful on the go, so he basically outlined emotions of disgust upon the question, which shows that Gypsy was just aiming at making Nick's character in the book seem more like a heartless monster. She went ahead to blame Nick for accepting to do what she manipulated him into doing, writing. With hindsight, I wish Nick had been someone different. A man perhaps who would have stopped me in my track, told me it was going to be okay, and that he would help me find my dad and call the police, or at least tell his family to help me. I wish the man I met online would have been able to help me see the desperate time do not call for desperate measures. That when you love someone, you help them rise above circumstances instead of taking the lowest way out. I wish the man I met online hadn't been as irrational, as isolated, which I find quite hilarious because she blamed a man that was even receiving a disability check for his low IQ and autism, which she, by the way, knew about because it's not like she had thought Nick was mentally okay 100%. So we would expect her to be like, I am sorry I took advantage of an autistic man who helped me unalive my mother, but instead blame Nick for being gullible. The nerve of Gypsy up to date, she takes no accountability. There are more details that we shall be uncovering in this book, and keep tuned to keep updated. For now, you can let me know what you think about this book. Do you think anything narrated in this book is even slightly close to the truth? Do you think Gypsy just decided to go with the narrative she thought doesn't manipulate her more? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, like and subscribe to keep updated.